Good evening, gentle listener, and welcome to the Unfiltered Mind, where hosts Graham and Hayden explore fascinating and thought-provoking topics, sparking curiosity and thoughtful discussion among listeners. Through these open-minded discussions, the Unfiltered Mind seeks to inspire a deeper understanding of the world and reason as a whole, while fostering civility and connection in an age of division.
Welcome everyone to episode 2 of the Unfiltered Mind. In this episode we decided that an interesting subject to talk about is the death of modern critical thinking. Within modern society there is a distinct lack of logical reasoning and just thinking about things and why things are done the way they are, or why even you do what you do.
Absolutely. I think that a very key component of what makes us human, and quite frankly a lot of ancient thinkers thought that our ability to reason is what set us apart as human beings ourselves. You know, it's our ability to reason at this higher level that, you know, most other animals cannot do, at least not to the same degree that we can. And I think that the death of this has really impactful connotations behind it. So, I think it's something that is worth diving into, it's worth exploring, and figuring out what we should do about this crisis. I'd like to start off with, critical thinking is dying. Just straight up. Especially in the modern culture where there's a lot of people who have been told that throughout their schooling and whatnot, you're just to do as you're told. And so you're told what to think and you're told what to believe in a lot of different contexts and in a lot of different ways. You have things such as the news and stuff like that can impact people's views, and kind of this aspect of fear gets introduced to everything, which makes people stop thinking. It's something that, you begin off learning in psychology is as soon as the fear response gets activated, the frontal lobe shuts down. It's fight, flight, or freeze, So all of that higher level critical thinking is gone. And I think a lot of people, when they watch the news or something like that, get kind of turned into that mode. So
to summarize that, you're basically saying that society as a whole and culture as a whole is sort of has this dependence on someone else to tell me what I should think and why I should think it, instead of taking the time to reason through it yourself and to, determine what do I think about something? What do I believe? And why exactly do I believe that? And instead of spending that time and doing this sort of self-reflection and examination, or examining also the stuff around us, not just internal, introspective, reflection, we're relying on, everything else around us, like social media, the news, even within the church, we rely on, the pastor to tell us what we believe, instead of, maybe it takes, sure, the pastor knows what's right, hopefully the pastor knows what he's talking about, but also we should also go out and sort of do this examination ourselves and think about everything that we believe, why we think that, and exactly the reasoning behind why we do and think and why we should be doing those things.
I think when Socrates was talking about the unexamined life is not worth living, there's a lot to unpack there, because you have this stereotypical child's game where it's unofficially called the why game. You go up to somebody and you're like, oh, well, what's the weather today? Oh, it's sunny outside. Why? Well, because the sun's shining. Why? Well, because it's in our solar system and there's no clouds blocking it. Why? Well, the clouds decided to be somewhere else today. Why? I don't know. And a lot of people have condemned that as like, that's childish, unimportant, and you're just seen as being annoying and kind of cruel, which, in a sense, you are. Because there is nothing more annoying than hearing this child come up to you and question literally everything about everything. But I think that it got so beat out of modern society that we could use a little bit of it more, especially when it comes to things like recognizing the presuppositions that people bring to the table. So let's say that you hear an argument for someone who is a supporter of funding research in Africa. And, well, their entire argument may be very solid, but then you see, their entire presupposition is built upon the fact that they think Africa is the poorest, in most need country in the world, or series of countries in the world, and therefore they are in higher need of help than the others. Okay, well, why do you believe that? What have you seen that makes you believe that? And kind of trying to find, okay, well, why should I believe your arguments that you're giving me based off of a presupposition I'm not sure we share?
Yeah, and this is why in scholarly works that you would cite scholarly sources, because you have to give proofs onto why you're saying what you are, saying what you say is a fact. You have to have backing evidence, and we really only do this within the scholarly realm anymore. In everyday life, you kind of just go with what is popular belief, and popular belief is not necessarily proven, per se.
Absolutely.
Because, everyone's just going with what the big idea is currently.
Absolutely.
And with the flow.
And there's plenty of cases that you can find all over the internet where it's talking about, this was a common belief, but it was misunderstood and caused people to... Two that come to my mind readily are, those Coinstar machines that you can find places? They counted the coins too fast to where people doubted their accuracy. So now Coinstar machines have pre-installed clinking sounds and print the receipt slower, therefore people trust them. Same thing with that little green stripe in the mint toothpaste. It does nothing. It does the exact same thing as white toothpaste. But people commonly believe that it held some secret ingredient that was going to clean their teeth better. And therefore, it sold like 4 times better than just normal white toothpaste. And so, it's a really key aspect to just take a second when you're at the grocery store looking at toothpaste and thinking, why do I want to buy this one instead of this one? Okay, well, it has a green stripe on it. What does the green stripe do? I don't know. Okay, well, maybe let's figure that out.
And you bring up an interesting point about shopping and advertising. So us as a society are always looking for ways to do things faster and more efficiently and for us to do less work at a time. And that leads to less research, and we click on the first thing we see or pick up the first thing on the shelf that is in the most prominent position. And if you do that, all you're doing is you're just essentially funding the company that has paid the most money in order to get their product to where you can see it first, rather than the best product for what you actually need.
Absolutely.
And that's a completely different topic altogether, but it leads to it shows a bigger problem in our society, and that's the desire to do as little work as possible and still be able to, have a half-decent product or a half-decent life with the as little amount of effort as you can put in, because you want to go at free time, which is not essentially free. You're going to waste it doing something, but we're looking for the easy in and the easy out.
And companies at large, this was brought up by a number of continental philosophers in the 20th century when they were criticizing the entire idea of capitalism, is because basically with the assembly line, people became cogs in a machine. And they started, there's some technical word for it that I'm blanking on, but it's, let's say that John has a room, and his desk is over against the right wall, and his task is over against the left wall, and then he has to go do something on the north wall, and then the south wall, and then back to the left wall and to his desk. Well, we've come to the point where we are going to move all of those things right next to each other so that he can get all of those steps done as quickly as possible and in as few steps as possible. So now he can return to his desk, do more work, get more cycles done faster, increasing production, increasing the magnitude of whatever he's doing, or we can pay him less. And so it was criticized as being highly dehumanizing. And I think that the shift to logic has been important. It is fairly simple to be like, okay, well, let's get this done faster. Let's get it done more efficiently. And granted, I am so infinitely glad I do not have to go farm my crops in the morning. Thank the Lord for that. I have a black thumb. Everyone knows this. I would kill everything. But so there's a degree to which that's healthy and good for society. But I think that when you try to start tying in the consequences of this kind of cultural shift that we've had over the last 200 years or so, even, I guess really even just 100, I don't know. But, you know, it has led to people adopting more of this mindset of being simply a machine. So you have this shallower thinking where it's like you have daydreaming as opposed to thinking about, why am I here?
Yeah.
So
we go from the idea of you spend your time thinking and examining the things around you to we sort of just go to this mindless do. You just kind of do stuff and you don't think about it as you're doing it. And it gets very easy just to keep doing and not think about it, because in order to think about what you're doing, it requires effort. And like I was saying earlier, we don't like effort anymore. Effort is hard. It takes motivation, and we're looking for as little effort as possible because we lack motivation.
Absolutely.
So that brings up a really good question of why do you do anything if you can't explain why you're doing it?
Exactly. And I think at the very core of the American identity, there's a problem with that. Because let's say you talk to a college student, average college student. They're going through getting a business degree. Okay, well, why are you getting a business degree? Well, I want to go do business. Why? Because it pays well. Why do you want it to pay well? So I can have more money. Why do you need more money? So I can provide for myself. Well, are there other ways to get money? How could you do this? Is this the only track? And I think a lot of times we're locked into thinking that this one job that pays $90 gajillion a year is the only way we're going to be able to survive on this planet. Because, like, okay, well, what do you mean provide with this money? Oh, well, I need food, and I need to cover my electricity, and I need to, get clean water and all this stuff. Okay. Rain collection system, solar panels, and farming. It's out there. It's literally out there. It's not the only solution. I think a lot of people like making it the only solution, and so they just are so upset about having to, go into this job that they hate every day, to do something that they don't love, and it kind of does foster this kind of resentment against life at large, which leads to a lot of depression, and kind of like we were mentioning in the last podcast, fuels that mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm. And just a random point, since this is the Unfiltered Mind, and it's something that I thought of when he said solar panels. You cannot, in fact, power an entire home with a roof covered in solar panels.
Fair.
But so the solar panels, the energy that the solar panels create goes straight back into the grid, and you get a credit on your electricity bill based on the amount of power that you generate going into the grid.
Well, unless you are truly like off grid, and then you
unless you truly use
those...
like no electricity, in which case you can in fact power your house with all solar panels.
Yeah, no, and it's easier said than done, especially when you're off grid. You know, you are using very minimal electricity because you need a tiny little air conditioner, like window unit or something for your 300 square foot house, as opposed to, having to get 3 HVAC units to power or to give air conditioning to a 4-story house that has 18 rooms, and it's like, okay, well, obviously you're not going to be able to power that off solar panels.
Yeah. And so going back to the main point, and so you gave the example of the college student and the business degree, and yeah, you should be able to explain what you're doing, because if you really have no explanation for what you're doing, then it follows logically that there is really no purpose to what you were doing. Mm-hmm. So purpose and explanation kind of go together. And this fact that if you can explain what you're doing, then what you're doing truly has a purpose in your life. Although if you have an explanation that's sort of explaining against what you're doing, then maybe you should rethink what you think the purpose is. For example, what you're saying about the business degree, your explanation was all purpose-based. So you're like, I do it because it has this purpose, and I do that because it has this purpose, and it provides for this purpose. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
I think that another key aspect of this is being able to kind of figure out, okay, well, what is the strength of this reason I'm giving? For example, if I went off to business school because I truly want a Lamborghini when I grow up, and I will stop at nothing to get it. That is my dream car. I want to mod it out. Just kidding. Don't do that. Lamborghini will sue you. But
please don't ruin the Lamborghini.
But, versus my dad told me to. Okay, what is a fairly stronger reason? And if
is getting a Lamborghini truly a good reason to go get a degree?
Well, it depends on your motivation. If that's what motivates you and that's what gets you out of bed in the morning, heck yeah, do it. Go get a Lamborghini. But, at the same time, it shouldn't be... you should be able to find the thing that motivates you the most versus finding just the most convenient first grab option as a, quote, reason.
Yeah.
I think a major thing that makes all of this very difficult is emotion. We are emotional animals. Or emotional creatures, sorry. Animals sounds reductionistic. But there's a lot of things that kind of require emotion. We have friendships, we have relationships, and family ships. I'm not
family
sure.
Relationships.
Yeah, sure. And family.
Yeah.
That all require an emotional connection, or at least the ability to access that. And I think that that's why sociopathic behavior ostracizes people so much from society, is because, what do you mean you can't empathize? What are you talking about? It's completely out of our league to imagine that as the, quote, normal people that we are, And I think that culture has decided to take this and run with it and been like, I like that because it caters to how I feel, and I want to feel good, and I want to feel validated. So I think that I'm going to get the most attention from being a rat. I've decided I want to be a rat. Don't tell me otherwise, because then you are denying me happiness. You're denying me joy. And that is terrible. How dare you do that to me? So I think that it's a lot easier in modern day culture to feel versus think. And I think that the balance of these things is really, really hard to get right. You're walking on a knife's edge.
Yeah, because we tend to go to one extreme or the other. We tend to go to, like, emotion rules, or we tend to go to, like, logic and reason rules, everything. So we're either, like, only emotional beings or only reasoning beings. And we really need a balance of these two things in order to really function properly in society, and even in everything, even the things that people tend to say should be emotion driven, like relationships. You really need a healthy balance of both emotion and reason within your relationship in order to maintain that. And the same thing with things that we tend to, like, to say are logic driven or reason driven, like, you know, making decisions, for example. We tend to be like, oh, you should really think through what your decision making is, as from a reasoning standpoint, but you really need to balance emotion and reason for both of those things. So, you know, the extreme that we tend to put relationships in the emotional extreme, we tend to put, like, decisions in the logical extreme, or, you know, whatever else you can put in those extremes that we tend to do. You really need the balance of both reason and emotion to truly make the best out of those categories.
I would edit what you said at the very beginning of that in one way. You said normally we're ruled by one or the other. I think that instead of being ruled by one or the other, we're striving for one extreme or the other. For example, in my personal life, I find myself striving toward reason. I want reason to rule because it's easier, it's black and white, it's simple as heck, there's no complicated, fickle, weird, oh, I don't feel like it anymore. It's just discipline, get up, do the same thing, get it done. It's militaristic almost. And I think that the military kind of is forced to be that way because you have to turn off some part of your emotion if you are literally killing people.
Yeah, because if you allow your emotion to take control, then you will never be able to mentally handle what's happening. But
exactly.
That's sort of off topic.
PTSD.
Yeah, exactly. PTSD and shell shock. So with the emotional extreme, we tend to have this idea of you know, do what you feel is right, or, you know, follow your heart. These ideas that you mentioned earlier, where it sounds like a good thing, it sounds like a good thing, like, ooh, my heart tells me to do this. It's probably a good impulse. But rather, I would say that you need to balance that off with then taking that impulse and being like, is this a good idea? Like, truly. Like, from a reasoning standpoint, is this emotional idea a good thing? And vice versa. You take this idea that you come up with, and you're like, I have deducted that this should happen. And then you should search your feelings or your emotions and be like, does this feel right? And that's sort of applying to your moral standard that you have naturally, because all humans have this sort of moral code that is ingrained in us that we make all of everything based off of. Sort of this, you know, lens that we do everything through is sort of a lens, anyways.
Absolutely. And another thing that's interesting to just kind of point out is the stereotypical gender divide between these two extremes. You always hear, oh, women are the emotional, you know, they seek connection, they seek, you know, interpersonal relationship a lot more than men. Men are fully content to go sit in their man cave and do the next logical task, and which causes a lot of issues when those collide in marriages and dating relationships and even friendships, where this girl will come up to this guy and be like, oh my gosh, my day, it was awful, it was terrible. And so the guy looks at this, that's a problem, I should fix this.
Why?
Exactly. So why was your day bad? Well, I woke up and I didn't like the position of the sun. It hurt my feelings. And so the guy is just going to pass it off as completely stupid because there's no way to fix the position of the sun. Like, if you don't like it, try a different time. Yeah. I don't know what to tell you, man. And so the woman sees this as a complete rejection of relationship because, oh, well, suddenly you're giving me solutions, not being there with me and empathizing with me.
What they're always looking for is sort of this emotional, empathetic sort of, reaction instead of I'm going to fix your problem sort of reaction. Because you have, like you said, there's a stereotypes where, and this is not 100% true, and no one should take it that way, but you have the stereotype where women tend to be seen as sort of these emotion-driven beings, and men are sort of this logical problem-solving machine with no emotion.
Yeah, exactly. Hence, soldiers are normally and vastly predominantly guys.
Yeah.
But I think it is an interesting thing to point out, especially in this podcast, just thinking about, okay, well, when I'm connecting with these people and I'm trying to really develop the best version of myself, especially in appearance to other people, what are some things to keep in mind? I think that's most definitely one of them, if not one of the most important. So, I think it's easy to be swayed to and fro with the extreme of emotion because it's changing, it's fickle, it's complicated as heck because everything's connected to everything else, and emotions are generally odd. You can wake up one day and feel great. You can wake up in the exact same day and feel completely terrible. For no good reason. It's just the way it is.
But then I'd like to contract that with logic. And from the outside, you would think logic should be simple and reason should be simple. And then you start thinking. And you think about something. And then that thinking, you come to a conclusion, but it only brings up 3 more questions that you have to think about in general. So you end up down this really complicated logic chain. So one is not necessarily simpler than the other. They both have their own complications. And I would not tend to say that emotions are harder to understand than reason, because reason can also lead to very complicated chains of thinking that could almost have a never-ending conclusion.
While I understand what you're saying, I personally disagree, because my experience with logic and reason is you needed an answer. Okay, let's deduct this answer. But in my experience, it hurts. Especially when dealing with people, because you have to kind of turn off this empathetic part of you, and it feels off. It feels bad. And it feels inhumane. Several villains have been portrayed as, especially robotic villains. They are all logic. And therefore they see, humanity has made multiple wars where they just kill each other. Let's eliminate humanity, and then there'll be peace in mankind, or whatever. And they're seen as the villain because that's inhumane.
Well, it's this sort of idea that if you come at everything from only a logical and a reasoning perspective, you come at humanity and other people as, oh, you guys have problems, and those problems need to be fixed. Or we could just... And the idea of logic is to eliminate problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you come at something from a completely logical and reasoning standpoint, you come at everything as, we need to fix and eliminate all of these problems that we have with society, or you have as a person, or, this thing over here has problems and we need to fix it. And emotion comes at everything from a sort of different way. Emotion sort of comes at these problems and is more like, these problems exist. We're going to be in these problems together. And you kind of need both things to come together to sort of have the correct approach, I would say, because neither one of those is a really good approach. And And you have to be very careful with that approach, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say that it's crucial, especially when you're trying to bring these two things together, to realize that logic is great for solving problems, and emotions are great for connectivity. So it's kind of the emotion that has to come first, the emotion that says, I hear you, I'm with you, I understand you, and I feel you in a broad variety of circumstances, so you can gather, quote, your team. You know, you have, whether it's at work and, you know, your boss just thrusts this deadline upon you very last second, and it's just like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get this done? I don't know. And it's really easy to slip into, logic. Okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Well, now everybody's stressed out. Everybody's really frustrated. But if you take a second to be like, dang, this really sucks. Okay. How are y'all feeling? And just take an emotional second to just be like, hey, I'm in this too. I understand that this is a big issue. It's really stressful. Now, let's come up with some logical ideas of how to get this done. So you have this connection. Nobody is alienated or feels like they're just a cog in a machine, but you have this productive group of people coming together and being like, okay, we can get this done because we're all in this together, you know?
Yeah, and that's a pretty good example of combining the two. Is you're taking this, you're taking the emotional aspect of, okay, we need to fix this problem, and you're taking the emotional aspect and applying it to the logical solution, so that the logical solution is not pure problem solving. Because a lot of times people, especially emotionally sensitive people, if you just go straight to, I'm going to fix this problem, then they'll essentially sort of have this emotional breakdown typically, because, you know, you're not coming alongside them in their emotions. Whereas if you bring the logical solution to the problems with this sort of emotional framework, then it tends to be, the response that you get from the other side tends to be better. And this is specifically in a relationship, or, you know, you gave an example of a job, like a corporate setting, any sort of interpersonal relationship setting. You kind of bring the two together by taking this logical problem-solving solution and then applying sort of this emotional, you know, barrier almost between the person and the logic, but you're still bringing both of them to the table at the same time.
Yeah, I think especially the best example out there, straight from the Bible, Jesus and Lazarus. You know, you think about, so Jesus comes up and he's met with all of these mourning people over the death of Lazarus, and he wept. He took a second to comfort them, come alongside them and be like, I hear you, I'm with you in your pain. And then he did, okay, well, what can we do about this? Lazarus come out, you know? Which, not saying we could just logically resurrect people from the dead. But you get the point. You get the gist.
Yeah, but you know, it was a problem that he could, and he was within his power to fix. Mm-hmm. But instead of just sort of going in and think about what could have happened if he had just gone in and, you know, raised Lazarus from the dead, everyone would have had this sort of like emotional shock. And yeah. I'm sure there was still some, but it was slightly lessened by the fact that he took a second ahead of time to sort of share with the people's emotions and, you know, show that he was also on their relational level with them. And that's sort of what you're doing with this emotional versus logic, because if you only use problem solving, then you sort of come across as this sort of like cold, unpersonal, like, you know, sort of condescending almost attitude if you're only giving solutions. Whereas if you sort of come alongside and be like, yes, I'm here with you, here's what we can do to fix this, or, you know, here's what I will do to help you fix this kind of thing, or just in general, a lot of different things, you're bringing both of them at the same time, instead of sort of the condescending, logical reasoning side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree. I think that there's a number of things in which this is useful, especially in application. You know, things like in relation, things call for different amounts of each thing. And I think as humans, we're given the gift of being variable in our responses to things. You know, there's people who tend to one way or another. For example, I know someone who is a pretty emotionally based guy, and he's there to connect with people, and that's the thing he does first. I know another guy who's all about problems, literally to the point where he refuses to discuss emotion. He's just like, no, let's fix the problem. Just keep it not gooey and sappy.
Yeah, I think both of us typically end up on the logical side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like this, we have a problem, we're going to fix it. And we're going to think through everything. And you tend maybe more towards the thinking side, thinking through things, and I tend maybe more towards the problem-solving logic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of apply these this thing to everything throughout your life. And whether you think it or not, you're probably applying one or the other to everything, or maybe you do have these things that you do actually apply a good balance to, and I would say that should be something that you maybe take some time to reason through and examine which parts of your life you may be using one or the other more, and maybe think about bringing a balance to those areas of your life.
Yeah, and I think, you have the best relationships that you're going to be able to foster are ones out of emotion. You can't logic your way into a relationship. There's just no way. And so I think that it's a time where you can put some logic into play, but not nearly as much as emotion. For example, when you're going home after a long day and your child comes up to you and says, "Oh my gosh, I had the best day ever. I saw a dandelion," and proceeds to talk for 30 minutes about this dandelion and how marvelous it was to him. You've gotten back from a long day, and you're tired as heck, but you make the rational choice to engage with him in emotion, and making the logical choice to open up and to come at this with an emotional standpoint instead of taking the easy way out, just being like, "Oh, that's cool," swipe them off your shoulder, or brush off. Yeah, that's the term I was looking for. But instead of doing the easy thing, you take the logical step that's going to nurture this relationship and apply some emotion where it's needed.
Yeah, but that is a danger, though. And I will say this is a good spot where you do actually need balance. And you said you need emotion in a relationship, which is true. And maybe emotion is slightly higher in a relationship, but having only emotion in a relationship causes this sort of emotional dependency and maybe passion that's sort of over the top and almost idolizing the emotional connection you have. Whereas if you bring a tad bit of reason and logic in, the logic actually helps you set up sort of these, reasonable boundaries to where you have this balance of emotional connection, but also you're not idolizing the emotional connection and within the relationship, because one extreme is too far and one extreme is also too far in the other direction, and you sort of got to keep it in this, zone.
I would also say, there's the kind of reverse example of that, where you have like a corporate setting. That's going to prize logic over emotion. If you get completely bent out of shape because you're a little bit stressed and you don't feel like doing whatever, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're pretty much screwed. You can't just not do your job because you don't feel like it. And I think work is somewhere where you use emotion to connect with the people around you, but you don't base yourself off of emotion, especially at work or corporate settings where people are paying you for your logic, for your reasoning, and not just...
Yeah, and what I was going to say is, so you said, it prioritizes logic over emotion, and bringing this maybe slightly more personal relationship to a corporate setting could be beneficial in a lot of different things. Obviously, you don't want to be like, maybe you don't want to be super, really, really, really close friends with your boss, but I mean, it doesn't hurt either. So,
that's fair.
There's also a balance that could be said to be had there too, yeah.
And I think, I know this is throwing it way back, way back to good old Rome, but, Marcus Aurelius was very impactful to me, especially in middle school. My friend got a hold of his meditations and was like, dude, this is the next scripture, and just gave it to me, and I was like, dude, this is crazy, because it was really, really interesting. I know hardcore Stoics are kind of all about this, kill emotion, get rid of it, and never pay attention to it, and just don't feel, and just act in this kind of apathetic tranquility. The Stoicism that I kind of picked up from Marcus Aurelius, specifically, was more observe your emotions, don't act on them. Which I think is very congruent with what the Bible has to say. You talk about the story of Cain and Abel. And Cain was mad. And God was like, well, that's not wrong. You can be mad, just don't act on it. And I think that that's a very important thing that the modern man could use.
So off of that point, Stoicism maybe even more defined today as sort of this, maybe do observe emotions, but emotions are not outwardly visible. Man cannot feel emotion, even if he observes emotions, and you'll never see an outward representation of inward emotions in a man, and sort of this definition of masculinity. And within modern times, I mean, would you not say that it is very stereotypical to sort of have this, this man, this guy that's probably super buff and, maybe looks good, and he does not show emotion because has this sort of overemphasized version of stoicism. Like, he does not feel emotion, he does not show emotion because men are not supposed to be emotional, being said is the job of women. Like, what kind of problems and how often do you think you see this in today's culture? And honestly, maybe this is maybe more of a problem 50 years ago than it is currently, but I don't know, what do you think about it?
I think that's an interesting point, especially to bring up now. It's just, I have a hard time wrestling with that because at the same time, I think about what I have really admired about hundreds of men that I've met in my life. The people who come up to you with confidence and, they know the just right amount of emotion to put in things. They're not going to get overly sappy. They're not going to show very much emotion if they do at all. But they are there. And they have the emotional wisdom to be able to sit with somebody in their brokenness. They're there if you need somebody to listen or talk to or something like that. Now, granted, they're not going to cry with you. But to me, every time I've met men like that, it's just, I want to be like that. That's epic. And so, I know that that's just, ironically, an emotional response. It's just like, I find that really admirable. I find that really, really cool to be able to just, oh yeah, let's treat ourselves like men and hold ourselves to that standard versus, the furry on the street who is ruled by emotion because somebody told him in 6th grade that he can be a squirrel if he wants. So what you're saying is you do not think that modern men need a little bit more emotion? I would say they probably need it, especially those people specifically, because the mind keeps score, and you can't just have I've I think that that's admirable as far as it goes with normal day-to-day life circumstance. Like, if your cat pees on the rug, yeah, let's not deal with that emotionally. Okay, let's do this logically. Let's treat ourselves like men. If your mom dies, your dad gets hit by a truck, both your grandparents die of cancer, and then your dog dies in the same week, if you don't shed a tear, there's something wrong with you.
But would you not say that the standard that society likes to hold men to is sort of the idea that you can handle anything and not shed a tear?
I would say that is a problem.
But do you not think that is potentially a stereotype that society tries to impose on men?
Oh, it's a massive stereotype for sure. There's no question about that.
Like, you're the tough guy. You can handle anything.
Exactly.
Nothing will faze you.
Hence, I will die on this hill. Men need therapy. Goodness gracious day.
Or men just need more emotional connections.
Yeah, that's also fair.
That's a substitute for therapy, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say that therapy is a good middle ground. That's why I said that. It's not, changing the way that people look at you necessarily.
But the way that people look at you doesn't necessarily have to be you don't have to be this stereotypical man on the outside. You can be the balance between the ridden by emotion versus the driven by logic sort of person. You don't need to be either one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can be in the middle and still be masculine.
Yeah, I'd say that that's true.
And what I mean by being in the middle, you don't necessarily need like a relationship with another person. It can totally be sort of this opening up to even another guy about things, instead of sort of being this closed off shell where you never go outside of your little box that you put yourself in to hide yourself from all things that would affect you outwardly. Yeah.
I'd say that that's a really, really solid point that I think a lot of listeners need to hear. It's very important to take care of yourself, and emotion is the way that the body signals something's wrong,
or something's right.
Or something's right, yeah. It's an indicator. I have a friend here that says all the time emotions are indicators, not dictators. And I think that part of being a well-rounded person is taking that into account and being like, hey, I, especially with guys, they need to sit down, be more open to, hey, there's a safe space. I'm not going to look at you less masculine because you're more emotionally open. Now, it's time to gender bend this. I'd say women also could use a healthy dose of being able to understand where a guy is coming from or where another girl is coming from, especially in regards to logic and being able to still be that core emotional being that I know that's a massive generalization and I'll probably get killed for it later, but anyways. So I think that's an important thing to bring up. What do you think about that?
Well, oftentimes I would say, and this is also a stereotype, sort of like the masculinity was a stereotype, but girls will sort of come alongside each other and offer emotional support only, and sort of this affirming whatever the other person is feeling or affirming whatever their automatic emotional response to sort of an event is, and they'll sort of just go along with it. They're there for the ride. They're there to be with the person. And oftentimes, emotional responses can be the emotional response that the emotion reaction person is having is not necessarily the most desirable response to be having, and oftentimes, like, emotion-driven responses can often lead to bad things happening, and the person who comes alongside and offers emotional support, like within these female-to-female relationships, often, if they sort of have to bring in the logical side just a little bit, to sort of be like, hey, I know you're going through this emotional situation, but also you have to think about this because you really don't want to cause this bad thing to happen. And a lot of times I feel like that doesn't happen, and this sort of stereotypical emotional affirmation. And I feel like maybe this is the side of society where we get a lot of these affirming just anything that you believe about anything without truly thinking through the implications and the consequences and why really are you affirming this thing instead of just sort of affirming everything.
Yeah. Before I say anything further on this topic, I'm just going to go ahead and put a disclaimer out there that I'm a guy. I apologize. I'm not telling women what to do. I'm not trying to force anything on anyone. It's just our humble opinion, how we see things. It's the unfiltered mind.
Yeah, and I just think it's important for people to
Absolutely.
understand how other people think and see about things, and obviously how we understand and think about things could totally be wrong, but this is how our perspective is on certain topics.
It's just logicking through things. There's a word for that. There's a better way of saying that. I just cannot remember what it is for the life of me. Processing through things. That's the phrase. There we go. I have the right words. I am literally a dictionary. What are you talking about? So, anyways, back to what we were talking about with that side of this whole thing. I'd say that it's pretty also pointed out in the Bible that action is important. James talks for an entire freaking chapter about, faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these people come around and sit with you and affirm you, I guess. But if you never actually do anything about the problem, you should probably find somebody who's going to come up with a couple ideas about that.
And the main problem with the affirming side of things is oftentimes if you're only affirming stuff without thinking through it, you could easily be affirming something that is very unbiblical or causing sin to happen, essentially.
Yeah. And
it goes for the other side of things as well. If you never feel emotion, then you could potentially be causing sin to happen or be sinning directly as a result of it.
Yeah. So I'd say, especially when this comes into the modern world, how would you say this plays into modern culture? It's just confusing to me to see, and I know, granted, it's just news stories and stuff you see, but how would you say that this plays into the culture at large?
Both stereotypes of both sides, they both play into culture at large, and we see it generalized on larger scales. As a lot of times, like the news headlines, you'll see you can see the overemphasized emotional part and sort of the gender movement, and then you'll see the other side, the sort of extreme stoicism in things like sports or anything directly involving masculinity. You'll often see both sides, and it affects pretty much everything you'll see in modern culture, both one extreme and the over, and the other, not the over. And I think we are called to sort of balance both things and take a biblical perspective as well. Maybe that's a third thing they bring in, or maybe we are called to use our emotional and logic to sort of determine the biblical perspective.
Yeah, I'd say that's completely fair. Well, I think that'll probably just about do it for this episode 2 of The Unfiltered Mind. And if any of you want to see something on this podcast, whether it be us talking about a topic or something that you found issue with within an episode or whatever, go ahead, drop it in the comments. We would absolutely love to address that as soon as possible. And yeah, thank you so much for joining The Unfiltered Mind. Have a great night.